This is part 2 of what's turning out to be a series on dealing with information overload. Where last week we talked about how the fact that with AI and with other things on the internet, it's just really hard to avoid deception. We took a survey of the Bible and what it had to say about deception. And tonight we're going the other way. Well, how do you figure out what the actual truth is? So that's where we're going. So here's the one I showed us last week. Which seems horrible, but it's an AI fake. Okay? So the basic idea is with the internet, you just can't tell what's true. This is
because of the internet, they had to increase the noise. And for many people, that's very overwhelming. They can't, they're used to sort of having some certainty in their lives. And that's just gone. And, my last Substack was called Reality or Lack Thereof, because there just is no defined reality right now. But we have to do our best to educate ourselves without getting over emotional, because what I see is people really getting stirred up on some of these headlines. And I just think that's a recipe for a heart attack or a stroke because we don't know what's happening. And so, if you're one of those folks that needs certainty, you need to go find it somewhere else.
Okay, so that's a gal named Melody Wright. Okay, so did you kind of hear what she was saying?
I didn't quite understand what she was trying to talk about.
This is like some internet investing talking head, fairly respected nationwide real estate analyst. And she says she's bamboozled about what's real and what's not, even in the real estate market. And other people are as well. And it's just really hard to tell what the certainty of things are nowadays. So, of course, the internet calls that a crisis, right? Anytime there's a problem, they call it a crisis, right? But it is a problem of telling what is actually going on. And, actually it's an epistemology crisis, isn't it? Now, if I told everybody we were having a Bible study about biblical epistemology, I think maybe a few of you would still come. But I didn't really know what that word was until a few months ago, maybe a year ago. But epistemology is the branch of philosophy related to the study of knowledge and justified belief. So it's this internet problem. How do you know what you should believe? It's like, what's the method? Epistemology is the branch of knowledge for that. And in mainstream nonfiction, which is what you're reading on the internet, news stories and everything, the epistemology relates to the credibility of sources, the validation of facts, and the construction of narratives. With the idea being you'd like to be able to ensure that the claims that are being made align with the truth through rigorous justification. Sounds good, right? So if you look at the way contemporary nonfiction does epistemology, they do it bottom up. They start with data, raw, unprocessed observations and measurements, and they try to step up from there to facts, right? Verified data points or statements, and then information, organized data or facts or data, to convey meaning, right? And then knowledge. Interestingly enough, knowledge is higher than information, which is information organized so you can understand it in a broader context, like on a whole subject. And then ultimately, with the epistemology, you start with data, you ascend to truth, which, in contemporary, the way these things work, what people think about truth is, it's statements that accurately reflect the reality about something. But the reason why we have a crisis is because there's just way too much of all this stuff, right? There's too many voices giving us data, facts, information, knowledge, and trying to tell us what the truth is. And not only is there too much, but it's agenda-driven, and it's all mixed together, and it's contradictory. So that's why there's a problem. I won't call it a crisis. There's a problem with epistemology in the world we live in. So we're doing a Bible study. So let's take a look at what the Bible has to say about epistemology and dealing with the information overload. So I did my own bottom-up study, looked up all these different words, tried to figure out how they come together and what they mean. And the interesting thing is, if you search the Bible, the word data does not appear anywhere. And the word information does not appear anywhere. But you do see some other terms. And the word fact appears a few places, at least in the English translation. So let's look at a couple of these. Acts 4:16, where the establishment in Jerusalem is saying, what are we going to do about these Christians? There's a real miracle that happened with the guy who was walking and leaping and praising God when Peter and John were on their way to the temple. And they say, what shall we do with these men? For the fact that a noteworthy miracle has taken place through them is apparent to all, and we cannot deny it. Well, the word fact here is actually just a little word that means, little tiny word, which means indeed. So there's not actually the word fact, it's just said, yep, so something indeed happened. And then here's another one. This is Christ speaking. But where he's like having the debate with the Sadducees, right? But regarding the fact that the dead rise again, have you not read in the book of Moses in the passage about the burning bush? How God spoke to them saying, I'm the God of Isaac, God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Well, again, in the Greek, there's no word fact at all there. It just says that they are raised. So, here's our conclusions about what the Bible has to say about facts, or the word fact. One, the word fact is used very seldomly. There's like maybe 5 places in the entire Bible, in my translation, the literal translation. And then in the Greek, New Testament Greek, the language has no word for fact. But here's one more. This is from Matthew 18, where Christ is telling you how to deal with relationship problems when you've been mistreated by somebody. If someone sins against you, what do you do? It's like a step process. And one of the later steps says, if the person who mistreated you does not listen to you, take 1 or 2 more with you, so that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be confirmed. And in this case, it says that every utterance, every word. So if you moved in the circles that one of the people who are here moved in 40 or 50 years ago, the prosperity guys were really big on the difference between logos and rhema. And this is the rhema word of God. But the word rhema here, where it says every fact, it says every utterance, every word, every rhema.
Spoken.
Okay.
Those guys would really go off on rhema versus logos. And by the way, rhema was the really good stuff. But anyway, that's just a complete tangent. But even here, you don't have the word fact.
But isn't like eyewitnesses somewhat of a kind of in the same field? Like when they talk about the eyewitnesses, and it doesn't.
Awesome, that's exactly where we're going.
Oh, sorry.
Perfect.
Oh, good lead.
So here's another passage where the word fact appears, at least in my translation, where Paul, he's got this big problem with the Corinthians, right? And they don't think he's authentic or something. And it's like a real problem. And he's like warning them, and he says, this is the 3rd time I'm coming to you. which is like, certain parents with 3-year-olds. I told you 3 times! Anyway, he says, this is the 3rd time I'm coming to you. Every fact is to be confirmed by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And again, he's using the same word, rhema. It's every spoken word is to be confirmed by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, this brings to mind a very interesting question here, which is, see how the funny print here is with Christ? He's quoting the Old Testament, right? That's what this funny font here means. And look, it's the same quote. Now, here's the interesting question. Who is Paul quoting? Is he quoting the Old Testament? Or is he quoting Christ? Interesting thing, right? Bet you never thought that before. Paul knows what Christ taught about fixing relationships. And he said, hey, we're getting to this step right here, the one that Christ mentioned. Maybe. Okay, but another relative word related to facts is the word evidence. And that appears a few times. And again, it's the same basic idea from the Old Testament. Numbers, if anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death at the evidence of witnesses. But no person shall be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. And then Deuteronomy, on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, he who is to die shall be put to death. But he shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. It's the same basic idea, right? So there's this interesting thing that when it comes to the way the legal system operates, we do have an expert here, but I don't think you'll say I'm wrong. For 3,000 years, the whole rules of evidence, the most basic rule is just 1 witness is not enough. You've got to have 2 or 3 witnesses. And witnesses are very important for establishing the facts as far as evidence goes. Now, if you look at this, he says every fact is to be confirmed by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So we have another word that the Bible uses in relationship to facts. Now I have 2 very interesting things. Thing 1 and thing 2. It's an old joke, but I like it. To say about the word testimony. Here's the really interesting one. Here's all these passages about the testimony. And the interesting one, let's just look at this one here for speed. Therefore, there I will meet you, and from above the mercy seat, Exodus 25:22, from between the 2 cherubim, which are upon the ark of the testimony, I will speak to you about all that I give you in commandment for the sons of Israel. And then the next one, 26:33. It's talking about how you build up the tabernacle, the portable temple they had. And he says, you'll hang up the veil, then you'll bring in the ark of the testimony. So there's this famous movie, right? All about this object. And they keep calling it the Ark of the Covenant, don't they? But right there in the book of Exodus, when they're making plans to build it, they don't call it the Ark of the Covenant. They call it the Ark of the Testimony. Isn't that interesting? That's thing 1. So, what was inside the ark? There was the actual stone tablets, Aaron's rod which budded, and some of the manna. And here's the verses that make you think that. And so this is very interesting. The Ark of the Testimony, the special storage vault to keep it safe of the testimony. What's it got in it? Well, it's got the 10 Commandments. And what's special about those? It's the only time in all of history, at least up to the time of Christ, where the Father himself speaks out of heaven to the people of God. And what does he speak? The 10 Commandments. That's the testimony. And what's the record of that? It's the 2 tablets, which were written on top of the mountain by God's finger himself. We're going to keep those really safe inside the Ark of the Testimony. And then this is the rod of Aaron. That's the rod that he used that caused all of the, all the plagues that got the children of Israel out of Egypt, right? And then there was a dispute about who's going to really be the priest around here. And in the dispute, Aaron's rod budded, even though it was a cut-off stick that he'd been carrying around for years, right? And then lastly, it was the manna that got kept. So these are all places where they kept physical evidence of God's work in a very special place. And I think that relates pretty directly to some of the things that we in the Orthodox Church do. About when God does something really special with a person or with an object, we keep that thing. And there's a word for those, isn't there?
Relic.
Relics. Isn't that interesting? Oh, you mean that Orthodox stuff is biblical again? Again? There we go, yeah. So that's thing one. And here's thing two about testimony. Here's Acts. It says, with great power, the apostles were giving testimony, eyewitness testimony, as you were saying, to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and abundant grace was upon them all. So the thing, too, that's really interesting is the word testimony is the word marturion, which is basically the same word as martyr. And we think about martyrs generally, mainly, as these are the guys who got killed for their faith, right? But here, it's the word testimony. It's the noun for the word testimony. And here's another one.
I have a question. Is that the same as the word that they use for witness?
You're leading me right on.
Okay.
You're leading me right on. That's good. This disciple, this is the very end of the Gospel of John. And it says, this disciple who is testifying to you these things, again, a word based on marturion, who's witnessing to you. I thought the Protestants were the guys who did all the witnessing. Okay, anyway, this disciple who is testifying to these things and wrote these things, we know that his testimony, his marturion, is true. So this is like a very important thing. When it comes to how the earliest Orthodox Christians explained their faith and why people should believe that Christ rose from the dead, it was based on their testimony, on their witness. Here's another one. So English has two different words that sound completely different. Witness, the guy who's on the stand in court. Testimony, what the guy who's on the stand in court says, right? But in Greek, there's just one word, one basic root word. Martyr. Martyr. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, so just comparing how we're doing. You got the contemporary nonfiction. And it turns out that the way you get to truth in the, according to the Bible, is you start with testimony to get the facts. That's pretty interesting. And it's pretty interesting. You want testimony from multiple trustworthy eyewitness reports, right? If you're going to trust it, it's got to be at least 2 or 3, right? And why should we trust Christians, and including the apostles? Why should we trust Christians about their testimony that all this stuff about Christianity is true? Well, are they trustworthy eyewitnesses? You think about the verse in Revelations. They overcame the devil by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Is that a reason to think these apostles are trustworthy? They stuck to their story, no matter what, unto death, because they actually saw Christ, the miracles, the death, the resurrection, everything. So here we are. We're doing biblical epistemology. It's really boring, isn't it? And we're starting with, at the bottom, testimony, and we're making the ascent up to truth. So by the way, sometimes you read things 40, 50 years ago and you never forget them, right? So there's this book called The Gulag Archipelago, which is unlike and a genius work unlike any other. But near the very end, after he's described the suffering that's in the words of eyewitnesses, this is an oral history. It's based on the actual accounts of eyewitnesses. He has a chapter called The Ascent, where he goes over how he himself and the other people who have suffered intensely in the Gulag, how that was the way they made their spiritual ascent. A spiritual ascent up to God. Okay, here we go. So we've moved up from testimony, now we're going to quickly do knowledge. And I thought this was a really interesting verse. It's one of the first places where the word knowledge shows up. Again, it's about building the tabernacle, the portable temple, and building the Ark of the Testimony. And it's talking about the guy who's the chief builder. And God himself speaks to Moses and says, I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all kinds of craftsmanship. So you can look at more than 100 different verses that cover the word knowledge, but it seems to, by my surveying them, it seems like the word knowledge means an accurate view of the what about a particular subject. And again, there are two things that are worth knowing that the Bible has to say about knowledge. The first one is in these Proverbs. Wise men store up knowledge, and the mind of the prudent acquires knowledge. And apply your heart to discipline and your ears to words of knowledge. The first thing is, we should, according to Solomon, wisest guy ever, we should be actively trying and exerting ourselves to acquire knowledge. It's a good thing. Seems obvious, but it's important. That's like one of the main messages in the Bible about knowledge. We should get it. And then there's another one that is more related to dealing with the information overload that we're facing, which is, leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. So this, it seems obvious, but maybe the words of the fool are entertaining. Maybe it shows some guy who's, jumps off a cliff and, bangs his head against something or whatever it is, right? It just says, if you're interested in acquiring knowledge, real knowledge, and not being bamboozled by the information overload, don't pay attention to fools. Okay.
How do you define fool?
Well,
Sometimes there has to be some discernment.
absolutely.
Because a lot of people follow a lot of very different things, and I don't consider
Absolutely.
those people to be foolish. You
Well,
know, there are
we
very
could talk
wise people
about it.
that I disagree with.
But I think, again, you want to look at trustworthy
Yeah.
eyewitnesses for your source of as your source of testimony leading to knowledge. If you found somebody who you've caught in the past as being not just wrong, being wrong is okay if you admit it. Or you find somebody who's not only wrong, but he refuses to admit it to the point where you think he's dishonest. Well, they're in the category of fool. Don't pay any attention with me. Okay, then we have this other very interesting thing about this same verse that we looked at before, the guy who built the tabernacle, which is understanding and knowledge go together many, many times in the Proverbs. Wisdom comes in there too a little bit. But we don't have time to go into understanding versus knowledge. But it seems to be a higher level. It seems to be another level besides just the accurate view of what about a particular subject. But it also includes the how and why of what's going on. Understanding. Okay. Well, we're cruising right along, but there's one particular kind of knowledge that the Bible and the church fathers give a lot more attention to, and that is the knowledge of God. So, and I've always been stricken by these places in the Bible where it says, "Then you will know that I am the Lord." Right? Have you seen those passages? There's a bunch of them, so let's just take a couple of minutes and look at some of them, okay? Well, here's an early one. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, "At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt." That's when they're out there in the stinking desert, and they say, "We got nothing to eat." And he says, "Tomorrow you are going to know that the Lord has brought you out, because the next day the supernatural food, the manna, comes from heaven, and they're fed as they are in the desert for years and years," right? So that's a very interesting thing. When will you know? It's after God does something completely unpredictable for you that he predicted for you. Isn't that interesting? Ezekiel 7. By the way, there's about 20 of these like this in Ezekiel. This is the scary one. "My eye will have no pity on you, nor will I spare you, but I will bring your ways upon you, and your abominations will be among you. Then you will know that I am the Lord." Isn't that an interesting, scary thought? That when you reject the Lord and these horrible things happen to you of your own making, that ultimately at some point you're going to know that the Lord is the Lord. Maybe too late. Okay, but here's the two that we cover every year during Holy Week. Ezekiel and the dry bones, right? Where after the dry bones come together, Ezekiel explains what the vision is about. And he says, "Then you will know that I am the Lord, when I have opened your graves and caused you to come out of your graves, my people." In the very next verse, "I will put my spirit within you, and you will come to life, and I will place you on your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and done it." So one of the ways that many people know that the Lord is real and that he's done things for people is when he's done it to you. When you had that first experience with the Lord, or even an experience at a crisis point, maybe it's not proof to other people, but you know for yourself, that was the Lord who did that for me. Pretty interesting. So there's maybe a couple more. So Jesus said, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he," which there's a bunch of meaning there, which we won't get into. "And I do nothing of my own initiative, but I speak these things as the Father taught me." There's something about Christ's crucifixion and resurrection that lets people know that he really is God's Son and that the Father sent him. And then here's another one. This leads us into the topic of the church fathers. So Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, "If you continue in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." So it's very different from the academic world, right? We've got an academic instructor here, where your character doesn't matter at all, right? All that matters is, hey, did you study the textbook? Did you put the knowledge in your brain, whether it's made any change on you at all? But Christ says, it's when you continue in the Word, and then you are truly a disciple of mine, that's when you'll know the truth. And that also goes straight back to Christ, where he says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And this is something that we Orthodox emphasize a lot, right? Which is that in order to really know God, you've got to be pure in heart. In order to be a real, what's the phrase? You guys know it. Sasha, you can pull this one out. What's the phrase about to be a social Orthodox theologian?
About to be a social Orthodox?
About what it takes to be an Orthodox theologian. I remember it
Prayer.
now.
Prayer. Yeah. He
A
who
person
prays.
who
He who prays is a theologian, and a theologian is someone who prays. Okay? So I got some quotes here
Well,
about knowing God.
there's
Go
also
ahead.
the idea that St. John, the theologian, is called St. John the theologian is because he leaned his head on Christ's breast and he heard the heartbeat of God.
Mm.
And that is why he's got, so it's a similar thing where the pure in heart,
Excellent.
they hear his heart,
Excellent.
they hear the heart of God. Yeah.
Pleasantly view.
A theologian, someone who prays is a theologian, and a theologian is someone who prays. Well, that's our little saying, but here's what St. Maximus the Confessor had to say. He's around 600 AD. The one who seeks the knowledge of God must first be purified in heart. I misspelled that. For the pure in heart shall see God according to the Lord's promise. Wow, these church father guys have read the Bible.
How about that?
Isn't it just amazing? But he agrees with the idea that you've got to be pure in heart if you're going to have a true knowledge of God. Now here's St. John of Damascus, who wrote the definitive Orthodox theological work, whose name I forget right now. Do you remember it?
You mean
And
Orthodox
I
faith
remember it.
information?
An exact exposition
Oh.
of the Orthodox faith. Was that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to use the abbreviated title though,
Okay, what's that?
on the Orthodox faith.
Okay. I like the exact exposition. Okay, but he says, and this is from the exact exposition of the Orthodox faith, the knowledge of divine things is received through faith, which comes from hearing the divine scriptures and the tradition of the church, for human reason alone cannot ascend, there's that word, to the heights of God without his revelation. Okay, and here's the last one. A little bit earlier, or about the same time, St. Gregory of Nyssa. He says, true knowledge of God consists in this, that the one who seeks him never ceases to reach forward to what lies ahead. For the divine is infinite, and to know him is to pursue him forever in love. So it's not just, hey, I got my 1600 on my SATs and I'm done. Well, that's our discussion of part 2 about dealing with the information overload, where we went through how the contemporary nonfiction does it, and it results in just confusion and overload nowadays. And that in the biblical way of coming to the truth, it starts with the testimony of multiple trustworthy eyewitnesses. And we've got great ones because they love not their lives to the death throughout church history.
Revelation 12:11.
And then when it comes to knowledge, the thing you should know is that you should really be spending effort to acquire genuine knowledge, but not paying attention to fools. And then we talked about how you will know God based on when he's really done something for you. And we talked about ultimately the knowledge of God requires a pure heart. So here's how far we've made it in part 2 on the biblical terminology for epistemology, where you start with testimony to get the facts, move up to knowledge, understanding, and we're making this ascent to truth. And I've got something really juicy that I learned about truth from this study, but it just wouldn't fit in tonight, so that's what part 3 is. Well,